When we first open a blank scene in Blender, Blender puts three objects in there. It puts a cube in the middle, it puts a camera up here, and it also puts a light in the scene here. And that means that if we press F12 to render the scene, that's what we see. Okay, now this light here, if I just select it, and I'm just going to come over here and I'm just going to, at the top here, just let's pull this down so we can see it a bit clearly, lamp, and if I turn this little camera off here, it means it won't render. So if I turn that off, come back to our scene here, press F12, we don't get anything lit. Okay, and we just get a grey background. Now what we can do is, let's put the light back on. Okay, is we can change what that light looks like. So we can actually come down to our mini icons here, and you'll see towards the right hand side there is a light option, and we can click on it, and we've got all these options then as to what it actually looks like. So if, for instance, I choose spotlight, okay, you can see it becomes like a theatrical spotlight. So let's just F12 that. Doesn't look a lot different, so we can play around with stuff down here. So we can come down here and change the size of it, so we can zoom it in a bit. So let's zoom it in so it looks like the cube. Then we'll see it when we press F12. You can see we've got a spotlight. And then we can play around with those things. So let's just open a recent scene that I've done, and I've got a scene here with several boxes, etc. in there, and I've put a load of random lights in the scene. So I'm just doing this on, I'm going to do this on Blender Render just to speed it up. So that's with the sun turned on. Now you see the sun is a massively bright thing. It lights the entire scene, and even though, if we zoom out, we can see that there is a sunlight here. If I, let me select it, got the sunlight here, and I can move that all over the place, and the angle will change, as you can hopefully see in this window here. The angle changes, but apart from that, the intensity and the brightness stays the same. Okay, so we can move it over here and F12 it, and we can see that nothing much has changed. Okay, so let's turn that off. We've looked at spotlight on the previous one. Point light is the default one, so that's like a work light. That's just like having a light bulb with no shade around it, just a light bulb in the middle of a scene which will light everything around it. Okay, more interesting perhaps is area light, and if we click on the area light, you see we get a quite more interesting shape. And what an area light is, if I pull out, is it's kind of like a softbox that a photographer might use. So it's, instead of being a bulb, it's like a large flat area of light that we can play around with. So you can come over here, and as usual, you can see the icon changes slightly depending on what it's going to be. Okay, so let me just select the area light here, and you can see I've got stuff here. I can adjust the size of how big it's going to be, and F12 again. So I can play around with that, and those are quite nice for lighting a scene. You can put a couple of those in a scene and light a scene quite nicely with those. So those are the basic sorts of lights. Let's just go back to a blank scene. I'm going to move that up and create a plane, and just scale this plane up a bit so we've got something for a shadow to fall on. Okay, now if I want to add some lights to a scene, create, and we come down here and you can see they're all in here, all the ones that we've looked at. So let's put a spotlight in, and we can play around with that. Let's go into quad view. Okay, and rotate. We can rotate it around as we see fit, or we can just come over here and it's usually easier to move stuff around here. So take the object, come onto the spotlight, and then just like we did before, bring its size down a little bit, and let's see what we get there. Okay, so you can see we can create all sorts of interesting scenes with these lights, and you really want to have more than one light in a scene. Also worth noting, so let's just go back to the default scene here that we've been using. So press F12. Oh, Blender render. There we go. So we've got, so let's just turn on the area light. We're going to turn off these things. Press F12 again. So that's the sort of quality we get if we're using Blender render. So you can see it looks a bit CGI. Now we can improve this dramatically by swapping from Blender render to Cycles render at the top, and I'd recommend that's the first thing you do when you get to the stage where you want to render stuff. Now, trouble with this is certain options change within Cycles render. Okay, so for instance, if I come into the Materials tab here, you'll notice if I go to Blender render, it changes quite dramatically. So between the two, so you really need to decide which one you're going to use before you start. But the beauty of this is, if I press F12 now, and it'll take a few moments, so we'll just fast forward through this, because it takes it a few minutes for the Cycles render to work. It's a lot slower, but you can see the quality is much more photographic, and the natural shadows that come out of Cycles are so much better than using bog standard Blender render. So that's Cycles. Swap back to Blender render, press F12 again, and that's what we'll get with that. So you can see the advantage of Cycles. You can also see it's a bit slower.